Hey everyone, I'm Ben Eubanks and welcome to HR Tech Talks today. I'm glad to have you here. As you can see, we're going to be talking to the team at Yello today. I can't wait to have Dan on in just a moment. Quickly though, I'd like to just welcome you back. We had a little bit of a hiatus there around holidays, around some fun scheduling mix up with some of our guests. We're going to get everybody back on track. So it's been an interesting few weeks, we'll just say. And in the bigger picture as well, I hope you're healthy. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're taking care of yourself. And today's conversation, we're going to talk about talent acquisition, about virtual hiring. We're going to talk about what's happening in the early talent / college hiring kind of space too. So some interesting things, some trends there as we settle in for a long winter's nap coming up pretty soon. So without any further ado, I'll go ahead and bring up our guest for today, who is Dan Bartfield. Hey, Dan, welcome.
Hey, Ben, thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. So I'm glad to have you here. I'm glad to have a conversation. And you and I were kind of chatting in the warm up a little bit ago about what's going on in our own worlds and things like that. But before we get started, give the audience a little bit more about who you are and what you do.
Hi, my name is, once again, Dan Bartfield. I'm co-founder of Yello. Yello focuses on early talent. Our main vision or our main goal is to give our recruiting teams automation as well as intelligence in order for them to focus mainly on the people, as in the candidates, versus dealing with all the administration work. We have a very strong focus on early talent, but with that said, we also have products that work in all types of recruiting, such as our scheduling product.
Awesome. I want to talk about some of those problems you're solving today in the conversation, because you and I had a chance recently to chat about some of the stuff that you're doing, and I was definitely intrigued. So just to kind of cast a big net, let's just start kind of broad and we'll narrow in as we go. Talk about what you're hearing, because you're plugged into a lot of employers. You're talking to a lot of different companies about what they're seeing, what they're facing this year. And I'd love to hear from you kind of the headlines, the highlights of what you're hearing as employers are trying to navigate the different world, we'll just say, than they have had in the past.
Ben, I lost you there. You spun out and froze.
All right. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
Okay.
Question, I heard you.
That's always the best. Okay.
Yeah.
So give me the ballpark, the big picture ideas, what you're hearing from employers. So you're talking to a lot of companies, just a different year than ever. And I'd love to hear what those big picture things are, the headlines that you're collecting from them. So they're talking about how they're dealing with what's going on, what's working from them, things like that.
Great. I would love to. I mean, this year has been different from any other year. I mean, let's be realistic about this. Recruiting teams really had to reinvent on how they recruit on campus or in early talent. So obviously the big things was virtual. How do we go, or how do we meet as many candidates as possible, and the right candidates without going to campus? So a lot of the funny thing is a lot of our large customers have been actually moving towards this over the last 2 years. And what we've been seeing over the last couple of years is that companies, large enterprises can't go to all these campuses anymore. It costs too much. They're also not always seeing the right students. So we did see over the last couple of years, some of our large companies transition to more of a virtual approach. What COVID has done is actually escalated or made it go even quicker. So we're seeing companies having to figure out, how do I recruit on campus more effectively and more efficiently without being there? So we're seeing, number one is that video interviewing. Video interviewing has become probably the most important tool that we're seeing our clients use today. They need to figure out a way of, how do I still give that personal touch while still not being right in front of you? One of the big differences when you look at early talent versus every other recruiting is that the recruiter makes a huge, huge difference in what company a candidate will go to. So without that touch, or sometimes with that virtual wall, sometimes it's hard to make that connection. That's where video interviewing becomes so important. The next thing we're kind of seeing a lot of people doing is finding unique ways in order to get in front of these candidates. So you got to think beyond the career fair, right? So career fair with virtual, they have virtual career fairs and they've been around forever, but people don't like waiting in lines in physical career fairs. People don't like waiting in lines in virtual career fairs. So how do we get beyond that? So we're seeing a lot of our clients being more creative, doing large scale webinars, where they can actually go ahead and give their culture, talk about their company for a large group of people, and then go down into visual. Some people can submit their resumes, and then they can go into individual type of coffee chats or one-on-one interviews. Those are also, we're seeing those. So those are different ways to approach. We're also seeing our clients be more creative in the classroom. So what does that mean? So how do I get in front of more eyeballs? How do I get my brand out there in front of more people? So we're seeing a lot more class events, class projects. Seeing how can we do micro internships? How can we do better virtual internships where I can give them an individual project to work on and give that aspect of it too. Once again, it's just trying to get their name out there and seeing that. But we are seeing that even though this happened very quickly into the virtual world, we're seeing companies being very successful. We just released a new survey where over 75% of them said, people who were surveyed said virtual worked for them. And they were able to meet their hiring needs as well as hit some of their other goals, such as diversity. Because when you look at a virtual world, you're able to actually go ahead and pick and focus on individual groups.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the stories I remember reading a couple of years ago about this large firm that was doing, early talent was their focus. And one of the things they realized was when they took that step to go virtual first instead of going, and they could have chosen to continue going physically to these places. They realized that because they did that, they were more efficient with their time and could reach out and cast a broader net to colleges they could not have targeted in the past. Again, enabling that diversity piece you're talking about, and also just allowing them to source from more places instead of just going to those 3 colleges we have to prioritize every fall or every spring. They got to really expand that net. So there's some good things there. One of the things that you're talking about, the webinars and other kinds of things where the recruiters are really thinking like marketers and thinking about how to get in front of these audiences and connect with them, and what are the personas we're targeting. One of the things I wrote down in kind of the preview for the session was I'm curious about how companies are doing some of those things where it's low contact but still high touch. We're still connecting, we're still interacting with people to the degree we can, even if we're not face to face, and giving high fives or whatever, fist bumps, whatever college students do these days. I'm too far removed from that now to be cool enough to answer that question. But how are they doing that with a high touch sort of approach? And I love those examples you're sharing, because it really paints a picture of we're trying to connect with these people, even though we can't see them at a career fair in a normal sort of context. We're still trying to find ways to really connect with them.
Yeah, what's really important about that is the best career centers only get 30% of the total population to come through. So you're missing out on 70% of the population. So by being more creative, and virtual kind of helped them push this, is to say, how do I get to the other 70% of the candidates that are not going through the career center? And it gives them a different way. So the other things we're seeing also, Ben, is that companies are looking at other different types of data sources. Yello, as you know, just recently released our sourcing marketplace, and it takes out other data places outside of the career center to help our employers find these candidates. So what companies want to do is define data sets. They just don't want large data sets of all these candidates. And a lot of times you'll see some other people, companies will say they have 14-minute candidates, and a lot of that 14 million people in their database, a lot of it's just registrar dumps. What our clients really look for and really want is the idea of, hey, how do I find a specific group of candidates that I'm looking for? How do I drill down and just specifically market to them these types of content? And then not only just market to them, but also how do I build a relationship with these candidates over time? So we're seeing, when we talk about individual sources, we're seeing a lot of our clients, these large enterprises, go start in the high schools, work in underserved areas to talk about accounting, talk about STEM. Because once again, when you think about recruiting, it is very similar to marketing, right? You have to build your brand over time, but also they're doing really good things for their community by going into these markets and help explain what these different types of careers mean. Ben, I lost your volume.
Sorry about that. I keep hitting my mute button on the wrong cadence there. I was going to ask you on the high school thing, because again, it's competitive, and now that we can reach bigger audiences and do it at scale and do it for relatively low cost, right, with the virtual piece, that's going to make it even more competitive. And so more companies are going to, I would imagine, are going to start stepping back farther and farther, trying to set the stage, trying to plant that seed, trying to start those conversations. I actually had a talk with one of the heads of recruitment marketing for a big office retail supply chain about a year or two ago. And he said, like, my vision, the perfect world for me is when someone thinks, man, I had a really crummy week at work and I just don't know if this place is right for me. I wonder what it would be like to work at X. Yeah. And he's like, I want to plant that seed so that when they start thinking, we're the first, at least in that selection, they start thinking about, maybe it's the right fit, maybe not, but at least they explore that. But that doesn't happen by chance. That doesn't happen by dumb luck. It requires some specific strategies, like you're talking about here. Like, we're going to get in front of these students. We're going to get in front of these young adults, these young people, and try to not just blast a message at them, but also make them feel like a part of something. We have a vision and they are a part of that, and they can play their own key role as part of this in their career path.
That is really important, because once again, it's about branding. The students graduating now want more than just a job. They want to be felt like they're part of the community. They want to see what you're doing to the community. So it's not always just pushing, this is the job opportunity I have. It's more about, this is what my company is doing for the world. And it's when they're ready, then exactly what you said, it'll be in the back of their brain of like, this is a company I want to work for. But when you also talk a little bit about high school, there's early talent actually fills a big gap. It's not just four-year universities, especially where we're seeing now, like I talked about high schools, we're also seeing a lot of people a lot of our companies looking at the boot camps, or looking at different types of apprenticeship programs. One of our clients actually offers, don't go to college, we'll come train you here. We'll give you a 3-year training here, rotation. So once again, locking them up. So there's other ways to think about that. But once again, it's about the branding, getting your information out there, and starting early. You have to start early in order to be successful, because it's no secret, the top companies are all fighting for the top talent, right? So it's like, when you look at early talent, what makes it a little different than professional is the fact that students always replenish, but there's also a set group you're pulling from. And you're limited by how far you can go and what brands and what schools you're hitting.
What about, I don't know if you have any like practical advice for someone listening in, but like the virtual internship kind of thing, are there any companies you've seen that are doing that well? What is working for them? What sort of tips might actually make that a success, instead of just, well, I did this virtual internship thing, but it was just a waste of time. I was hanging out on a Zoom call and never got to contribute. Or I don't know if there's success stories there, but I'd love to hear any tidbits you might have picked up, because I think I've heard of a couple companies that are trying to do that, and some of them have really seemed to do well, and others are struggling, we'll just say, trying to figure out how to make that fit this new kind of model of work.
You're going to have the right software in place for this to work. There's a couple things that have to happen. One is, it's got to be the right software where you can actually talk about the different types of communication. It's got to be heavy communication, heavy tracking. Your leadership has to buy into it. If your leadership does not buy into it, it's not going to work. And finally, there has to be a set project. What our clients are telling me is there has to be a set project that they're working on with a finish and end. So it's going to be different than doing multiple rotations and different things. It's almost like you're just getting a little taste of how the organization works, and then being able to use the right software to market to them and to go, because you should constantly be marketing to these candidates, even though they're interns, and being able to push and make sure they get who you are and your culture, because it's really hard to get culture across Zoom.
It is. Part of that might be, here's how we work, right? Here's how we appreciate each other. And you talked about earlier, the webinar piece is like, we'll take this moment to tell you what our values are as a company, and to let you like self-select in or self-select out, depending on that, right? And then over time, we'll focus more and more on what those specific deliverables or those specific work habits we're really looking for might look like. But I love this concept of having people do something. You said have like a finish line, right?
Yeah.
We're trying to get you to complete a task and actually show us what you can do. We did some research a few years ago, because I was very curious about how candidates perceive this idea of doing a recorded video interview or doing some assessment during the hiring process. How do they feel about that? And what we found was candidates like it if they have a line of sight between that thing they're doing and the actual job they would be taking. So if we can connect these two things together, and this project is similar to what they'd be doing in their first month on the job, or we'd expect them to do a piece of this as part of that actual role, then they really appreciate that opportunity. Even if they ultimately don't get the job, They appreciate the opportunity to show what they can do and demonstrate their best, put their best forward pretty much.
Yeah, and not everyone's going to get a job, and that's what's important with the process, right? Because think about an early talent. A lot of my clients, these early candidates, are eventually going to be consumers of their product or of their software or what they're using. So it's really important to put the student first. And in our survey that we just came out with, one of the things that we did see is that candidates are struggling a little bit with this process because of how important it is to have that connection with the recruiter. So it's really important that you make sure you put the candidate experience first when you're using virtual. So at the end of the day, the recruiters are loving it. And I think for multiple reasons, but once again, you always got to think about that candidate. Even if they don't get the job, you still have to treat them well and make sure that they have a great experience. I'm surprised that you'll see more and more over time that you take the candidates and they eventually should be moved over to your marketing department, because once again, these are candidates that are going to be actually using your product, using your software, or could eventually down the line buying your insurance. Who knows what it might be, but they are still need to be treated really well. And it's one of those things that we really stress is make sure you put the candidate experience up there as well.
I love that. That is excellent. So again, obviously this year I took a look actually at the research that the team had just completed, because I'm a research nut, right? You know that, everybody else listening in knows that. One of the things I expected to see this, but it still was this stark contrast when you see 2019 for this audience we're talking about, this group of TA leaders, priority and where they spent their most budget was in-person stuff. And then this year that disappeared and everything scale it virtually instead. And the good news is you can tell stories, I can tell stories about companies that are doing this well, but the majority of people are still like, okay, let's figure this out. It's not like everybody's got this figured out and you're the only one that doesn't. So if you feel like you're floundering a little bit, or you feel like I'm not sure quite how to start this, you gave some tips a few minutes ago on how to really approach the virtual internship piece. But I want to encourage those listening in, like, this is not something that you're expected to have solved immediately. This time next year, you better have things in place where you're going to be the one out in the cold, I would say.
And we saw a 500% increase from 2019 to 2020 in virtual. I mean, that we saw that large of an increase, 500% increase. So obviously, my theory on virtual is it's working now because everyone is doing it. But in the future, and you have to think about the future here, is we're going to see the best results is going to be a mix of virtual and in-person. And when we look at that in the future, that's where we believe we're going to be. Vaccines supposedly are on their way. So I still believe the spring will be virtual, and you really need to think about your tool set and understand how you're going to make your presence felt with the early talent group, because branding is, once again, very, very important, getting your name on that campus. But you also have to think about the fall. What does that mean for you? What mixture you're going to see? And this goes back to what I said at the beginning, where we've been seeing this trend happening for a while, where you're going to see a nice mixture between virtual and on-campus presence. And I believe those are the ones that are going to be the most successful. Because, like I said, it's working now because everyone's doing it. But once that first company goes back, they're going to get that competitive advantage. And I believe you're going to see a follow-up of that. And I do believe you'll see companies going to less schools. I do believe that. When I mean less school presently, like actually physically, but the schools they go to, they'll spend a lot more time there. But how are they going to make up that other need? They're going to look for virtual things in order to do that. Either it can be sourcing databases, or virtual webinars, or virtual interviews. They're going to spread that out in order to get a better round. Because once again, one thing this COVID has taught us is that virtual can work, and it can bring success if you have the right tool set.
One of the things you mentioned at the very beginning in terms of capabilities of Yello was the scheduling piece too. Will you talk about that just a little bit? Because that, again, when I think about when I was a recruiter doing all the various steps of recruiting, that was the part that I hated the most, if I'm going to be honest here. Right? I hated it the most, but it limits everything else. So when I'm procrastinating that one thing, then it makes everybody else in the process mad, from the candidates to hiring managers. And so talk about how you're solving the problem around scheduling a little bit, because we've got I just love to hear it in this context today, if you don't mind.
Yeah, no problem. Well, scheduling is typically the bane of existence for every recruiter, right? How do I do this? How do I get, especially with virtually too, now it can be spread over more days, but how do I get one candidate to interview with 4 people in my organization and make all the schedules work? So we created a software platform, a scheduling platform that can handle that. So typically something that would take an hour plus to schedule, we can get it down in 60 seconds. So it went through our algorithms, and the way our scheduling product works, it will look at everyone's calendar. So it integrates with Outlook and Google Calendars, Outlook 365, and it will pull all the calendars together and say, these are the times that will work. And by the way, I might never be free. So if that's the case, who's next up in line to take my spot? So it takes a lot of that back and forth of going back and forth and trying to figure out how to actually schedule a candidate. And we all know in recruiting, time matters, right? So how quickly can I get, most candidates will fall off the process because they're waiting too long, or another company swooped in and took them. So it's how do I get this as quickly as possible, and being able to work that and be able to get them scheduled and on the calendar. So there's different pieces with that, but it's something we're really proud of. It's something that our clients have saved a lot of time with. And it's something that really is being used by multiple different organizations. It doesn't have to be early talent. It's actually across the board.
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons that was resonating with me heavily is we just actually brought on a new person on our team, and I'm having him join me on some of these technology briefings because that's an area he's never spent any time with. And he's like, wait a minute, there are tools that help with actually scheduling the stuff. He's like, that was the worst part of me, having to email people back and forth as a candidate, because he's just recently had that experience. And I'm thinking, oh yeah, you sometimes, because I live in this world, you live here, and it's easy to sometimes forget that, like, people are still using the resumes. Send your stuff to careers at so-and-so inbox. And you're like, oh gosh, that hurts my heart a little bit, because that doesn't create a good experience for anybody in that process, and it's inefficient. And so I love making sure we're talking about solving those real issues, those real challenges, because you said it's the bane of the existence. Like, oh goodness. Okay. I was having for a second there.
You talk about candidate experience too, right? I mean, the candidate looks at that, and we have some very main brands that use our software that are not considered to be technically advanced, but they deploy something like that. It changes the attitude of the candidate. Also manages their expectations up front too, of what type of company I'm going to be dealing with. And that type of, it gives them, once again, putting that candidate experience up front. The best thing about scheduling though, Ben, best thing about scheduling is that companies that with 100 people or 50 people can benefit from a scheduling software, because we all know the smaller you are, the more meetings you have and the harder it is to schedule. So it's something that can work across multiple different types, because Yello's typical focus is large enterprise, but we're seeing success in companies with 1,000 employees or less.
I lost my train of thought there. I was going to tell you one more thing on the scheduling thing, just kind of hammer that home. And I'm totally blanking on it right now, but it's one of those things that, again, we all hate, and it's an opportunity for all of us to get a little better at. And it's something not a single person gets up in the morning like, I can't wait to do that part of my job. That's not something we want to do. And so if we can hand that off, it gives us the opportunity to spend more time. So 10 minutes ago, we talked about doing webinars for candidates and we talked about creating this really custom interactions with them and high touch, and how do we create these experiences so that we are top of mind for them. Those kind of things, you need some bandwidth to do that. And having that stuff off your plate, having that scheduling just handled, gives you more of that flexibility to really target those things you need to be doing and you should be doing to create better experiences. And that's what really excites me about, like, we know about automation and everything else, but what really excites me is what that freed up time allows us to do. The new things we can do, and the things we always probably knew we should have been doing, we couldn't quite get to it because it's too far down our to-do list. It really opens up those opportunities to create better experiences for the candidates and to really communicate with them the way we want to.
And that fits our mission. And that's what we're all about here. I mean, it's the idea of how do I get the cumbersome of all the administration work off the plate of the recruiter, so they can actually focus on what they were hired to do, which is to recruit, build those relationships, have those conversations. Because like you said, it might not be for this round, but if you build a connection, it could be for the next job or the next job after that, right? Because we know people don't typically stay in jobs for more than a couple of years anymore. They're not lifetime jobs anymore. So it's how do I build that relationship and have that? And that's really important for the recruiters. And it's really more important for the candidates, is how do I build the relationship so I can get a true understanding of what's going on at that organization.
And you pointed out earlier that I could think back to when I was applying for jobs and interacting with the recruiters, and some of those experiences were meh, and some of those experiences were like, wow, impressive. And for these students coming out of college, or these students, as early, you're talking about early talent, that recruiter might be the first recruiter that person's ever talked to in their life. So that's going to set an expectation for them. And if you set that bar high, then they're going to remember, well, they're not treating me like Dan did. He really took care of me, and he really listened to me. And so you have the opportunity to really set that bar and set that expectation for them in the interaction. And that will resonate, again, whether it's this job or the next job, or a couple of years down the line when that opportunity really presents itself, who knows? But it's investing early, and that will pay dividends over time.
You're 100% right, Ben. It's all about managing expectations, investing the time, and building the relationships. And if you're doing too much manual work or admin work and just trying to figure that out, you only have 24 hours in a day. So you have to make sure that, and the thing is, the candidate doesn't see all the pushing and the buttons in the back end. They want to have that conversation either virtually or in person or whatever it might be, but they want to build that relationship with you. Because in university and early talent too, it's not unusual for the recruiter to help the candidate with their resume, because they're technically your sponsor trying to get there, because you're not, the recruiter typically does the first interview, but then people in the business unit do the other interviews, right? Just like everywhere else. So it's not unusual for them to help you with your resume. It's not unusual for them to help you with reference. It's part of the process, right? So by building that relationship and getting out of that admin work, this is what makes the difference for that top hire.
Really prep them for that. Make them feel comfortable and whatever else you need to do to give them that edge. You had mentioned earlier the career center piece, and I know you probably partner with a lot of them, so I don't want to speak ill of them, but in general, I found that they're not always effective at giving students the right advice or supporting them in the right ways. For employers, do you recommend that they work with those career centers? Like, should they be approaching them, or should they be waiting for them to be approached? Like, how do you advise employers to go and make those connections so they can build a relationship that really is fruitful?
Well, it's a mix of different things. So yes, the employer should work with the career center and have a conversation with them, but the employer should also be working with, if you're hiring marketing majors, talking to the marketing department at that school. You're hiring accounting majors, talk to the accounting department at the stores. Build those relationships with the professors, because they're going to know the best candidates. All right. And they're the ones who are going to help you. And it should be a full stop. Like I said in the beginning, companies will go to less schools, but they'll spend more time. This is the idea of spending more time. You got to go beyond the career center. The career center is just one stop in the location of a university, but there's many different opportunities and options. And plus, trust me, these schools would love to partner with a Fortune 500 to do a project with for their marketing 101 course, or what it might be for their accounting, or how it might be with those different groups. But it's all different data points to get you to those candidates. It's not, the career center by itself will not help you unless you're going to thousands of career centers to do that. You have to look at other different types of sourcing databases. You have to, especially if you want to hit your diversity goals, you have to make sure you're focusing on that as well. But you really have to look at other options other than the career center. The career center should definitely be a stop, but it shouldn't be your only stop.
Okay. I love that. I love that piece. If I'm thinking about that from the perspective of the university or from the college, I mean, having big name company come to us and say, can we partner with your marketing class or partner with this class, your stats class to study this thing?
Yeah.
Like, they get a chance to say, hey, look at us, we're working with them. And that's just going to help them draw in more students who are interested in those kind of things. So it's like a benefit for everybody. It's not like someone's winning and someone's getting, the boot. Everybody's winning in that process.
Yeah. It's great. Like you said, it's great for everyone. It's the idea that, and students love it too, because they get an eye into the actual organization. But it's not always just the recruiter. They'll bring somebody from the business unit. And I've seen these where they've done class presentations and the winner gets X or whatever it might be. So there's a whole process there. And once again, it's understanding how to manage those types of things. So when you talk about like events, so like we always talk about career fairs, but I said that there's always multiple different types of events that need to be managed and watched. And it's, like I said, it's a whole process to get in there and to make sure that you're hitting all those touch points. And the more touch points you have, the more likely you're going to get a good hire.
I love it. So we're coming up on time. If there is someone listening, it's like, this is really intriguing, I want to learn more about Yello, want to connect with the company, what's the best way for them to do that?
Just go right to our website. There's a lot of good information there. There's a lot of customer testimonials. You can go ahead and schedule a demo, but it's yello.co. There's a lot of case studies in there as well. And you can see some of our clients that are using it today.
Wonderful. Dan, hey, I appreciate your time. This has been so much fun for me to riff on the topic a little bit and to honestly to learn more about that space because of all the recruiting I did. Most of it was professional, not as much on the early talent side.
Yeah.
But it's such a unique kind of flavor that it's good to hear that you're out there giving companies this edge, this benefit of your expertise and all that other stuff. So I appreciate you joining me.
Oh, thank you, Ben. Thanks for your time. And once again, if anybody needs anything, feel free to reach directly out to Yello.
Perfect. Awesome. Thank you, Dan. Good to have you here. Thank you to all of you for joining us for the conversation today. I hope you enjoyed it, learned some things, got some ideas, got some insights there. I love the piece about building out projects as part of this virtual internship so people have some real experience. They're getting that, not the whatever the virtual version of getting coffee for someone, right? They're getting the real experience there. I love that piece of it. Well done. Thank you to Dan for joining me, and thank you to the Yello team for what you're doing out there in the market. I appreciate it. To all of you, thank you for hanging out with us today. We'll catch you next week. Looking forward to another episode of HR Tech Talks. Thank you and have a great week.